So we saw this really interesting trend last year that we announced in our quarterly earnings. So last summer, we noticed that connected TV inventory had grown by 10x versus the year prior. So we're seeing this boom in inventory that's coming on into programmatic really for the first time. In previous years, you could run connected TV, but you couldn't really run at the scale that maybe you wanted to. And every time we enter a new media channel, when we enter digital radio, digital audio with Spotify, or we enter native, the first thing you need to do as a DSP is assemble as much supply as possible. Because what lets you do is lets buyers say what data can they bring to the table, what audience data, what geo-targeting, and start to pick out the ads that they want to buy from that. And so the first step for connected TV was to say, well, how do we see more inventory coming on? And with companies like Dish Sling, AT&T, DirecTV Now, some of the skinny bundles, we saw this massive boom in inventory that was being made available for programmatic buyers to access. And once the inventory came, the buyers showed up. So in our Q4 earnings, which we announced in February, we talked about how connected TV spend on our platform had followed and also 10x'd. So two of the fastest growing things happening on our platform. And today I'm going to dig into a little bit on why that's happening. So the first thing to call out is that streaming is now mainstream. Sometimes when I'm talking to agencies or marketers, there's this perception that people using a Roku or an Apple TV or a Chromecast or a Samsung Smart TV, anything that's an internet-connected device, that they're early adopters. They're not. 3 in 4 US households that have broadband now connect over-the-top devices to the internet. They're watching this. This is common. In terms of the adoption curve, we're in the kind of late mainstream phase of that curve. This is nothing new in terms of consumer behavior. And then when you look at how many consumers actually have internet, it's about 82% of the US has broadband internet. So put those stats together, you're looking roughly 2 in 3 households who have an OTT device connected to broadband internet. You combine that with what you can see on this chart, which is that TV viewership, broadcast and cable, is declining. There's a lot of talk about cord cutting. That's part of the story here, but that's not what this is. What you're looking at is the change in the hours spent watching TV every month on broadcast cable, traditional TV, by age group. And you can see with some younger demographics, so with 25 to 34, down 39%, 18 to 24, down 48%. And this is comparing 2010 to 2016. So over a 6-year period, younger demographics viewing time is down by almost half. Now, I don't think anybody's saying that means they're watching less TV, that people are watching less content. They're probably watching more. They're just not watching it on broadcasts and cable TV like they used to. You can see that the only demographics that are growing are 50 to 64 and 65 plus in terms of broadcast consumption. So consumers are moving in a major way over to streaming content on connected TVs. The other stat you often hear is that cord cutting keeps happening. And if you go to the Programmatic IO of the TV world, and you go to some of their conferences, they say this is overblown. Cable is still huge. And they're right, it is. But the trend is certainly what people are thinking about. So in this chart, what you can see is what's the household penetration of cable pay TV in the US. And it peaked in 2010 at around 90%. And it's been declining since then, a couple of points per year. But as you look at the segment from 2014 to 2016, the pace of that drop is accelerating. More and more people are cutting cable. And I suspect when you see the stats for 2016 to 2018, the number gets even sharper. When you hear from some of the analysts who cover the major MVPDs and cable operators, they're anticipating that over the next 5 years, that number drops even more significantly. So consumers that have cable are watching TV in other places, and fewer consumers have cable than used to. The point of this is that connected TV and streaming content is here and now. This isn't something that's coming. This is not something that's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. It's already here. And again, looking at time spent, this is looking at 2011 to 2017. And that white bar at the top, that's how much time people are spending on average with connected TV and streaming video. So currently, it's 1 in 5 hours of consumption. And that's a national average. I'd argue that by demographic, if you looked at younger demographics, that number probably looks like more like 3 or 4 hours of their total consumption is on streaming. But as a national average, it's 1 in 5. The pace of that trend means by 2021, you're approaching half of all viewing is happening on a Roku, on an Apple TV, on a Samsung Smart TV, on a streaming device. So it's quickly going to become the majority of how TV is watched. What's also interesting is looking outside the United States. We have offices in Shanghai. We operate in China. That market skipped past all this. So 3 in 5 hours today in China is actually happening on a connected TV. Cable was never a big thing there, so they're kind of skipping to the end state. They don't have to do cord cutting and cord shaving and cord nevers. There never really were any people using cable, so they're going straight to connected TV. And that's common in a lot of the markets that we work in. I think it's important to call out, though, that this is not a binary thing. Too often, I think the story in the digital world is everyone's cutting cable. You need to buy online video. And it's not quite true yet. You still have 80% plus of US households that have cable. There's a lot of people who still watch cable and watch broadcast TV. I'm one of them. I have both, right? So I have cable TV, largely because my wife wants to watch Bravo. That's the primary reason we have cable TV. But we also stream content on HBO Go and Hulu and Netflix. We do both of those things. I was at a friend's house this weekend. He did cut cable, but he had one of the newer antennas you can use to get broadcast channels over the air on your TV in high definition. So he's watching sports on ABC and CBS through his broadcast antenna, and then he's streaming content on his Apple TV. This isn't as simple as saying, well, consumers have moved from one to the other wholesale. They're actually using both. And that's part of what makes this so hard from the point of view of a marketer. Just like you have the fragmentation of people watching content or engaging with content on their tablet, their smartphone, their desktop computer, all these different devices, now the same thing's happening. You have one big screen in the home, but they're accessing content in different ways. Sometimes it's coaxial cable, and sometimes it's the Ethernet cable. I think the moral of the story here is that connected TV is now big enough that it justifies a much larger investment. You have this thing where, just like mobile used to be, where consumers were spending so much time on their smartphone, but the media and marketing spend hadn't caught up proportionally. And Facebook was one of the companies that benefited from that. They solved the mobile challenge. They figured out how do we actually match up time spent and a good vehicle for ad dollars. If you put yourself in the shoes of a media buyer in the 1970s, and you wanted to buy and build a brand nationally and buy television, your job was relatively easy. You bought 3 major networks. You bought CBS, ABC, and NBC. Cable wasn't really mainstream at that point. If you wanted to build a brand nationally, you had to buy the big 3 networks. I'd argue that today, if you're a marketer or an agency and you're not buying connected TV, it's the equivalent of not buying CBS in 1978. You wouldn't have done that then. You shouldn't be doing it now. To have the reach you need with some demographics, with consumers who are spending more and more time watching streaming, you need to be in connected TV. So overall, we see this trend. Consumers are moving faster than marketers. Are advertisers catching up? And if so, what are they doing to do that? How are they moving spend to TV, to connected TV? So I'm going to talk about 4 ways that we're seeing spend move. The first is audience buying, kind of the bread and butter of programmatic. The second reason is frequency control, which I think is kind of something we don't talk about as often in programmatic, but we should. The third is closed loop sales measurement. And the fourth is measuring incremental reach with more traditional TV metrics. I'm going to talk about each one of these. So the primary driver, I think, if you talk to any DSP, any SSP, of programmatic's growth in the past 10 years was really around audience buying. You're giving marketers the ability to take first-party data about their customers, take third-party data to try to find new customers, and buy exactly those users. You can now do that in connected TV. So because you have an internet connection to every smart TV, every over-the-top device, you can leverage audience data just like you would in any other digital channel. And that's a huge opportunity for most marketers who have found a lot of success doing that in most digital channels. And it could be they're buying in-market automotive for third-party data. Or it's an airline who knows who the first-class travelers are, and they want to do a campaign just targeting them. Or sometimes it's around suppression. This is somebody who shopped at the store, either online or offline, the past few weeks. Let's actually suppress the ads and not show them any more advertising for the time being. It often prompts the question, well, how does that work? How does audience targeting on connected TV work? A connected TV device, so a Roku, an Apple TV, a Samsung Smart TV, is really just another identifier on a device graph. In the same way that you can bridge cookies to device IDs from desktop to mobile and vice versa, because it's connected to the internet and there are unique identifiers, you can start to bridge that data over to connected TV. And you can buy that audience the same way that you would on desktop display or desktop video or mobile in-app. that data can be used the exact same way. You know, one of the clients that we work with is Mazda and their agency, Garage Team Mazda. And they've been really innovative and cutting edge in terms of how they've thought about this. And I want to talk a little bit about what they've done that's so unique. So what Mazda saw, and Garage Team Mazda saw, was that more, just as I kind of outlined, more of their consumers weren't spending time with broadcast TV. They were shifting, especially the younger demographics were moving over to watch online video, to watch Apple TV, and watching on other places. And they said, well, let's actually line up the dollars to follow that. And they built an audience. So they combined their own first-party data on who's bought a Mazda in the past, who are users who've engaged with the site, all the usual stuff you do with a data management platform. They combined that with third-party data from Oracle and Datalogics on who's in market for a car, who are the types of people most likely to buy a Mazda, not the entire universe of everyone in market for a car, but just the people that they think best fit the profile of what a Mazda driver looks like. So they built their audience first. Then they said, let's take 10 DMAs. Let's take 10 or 12 DMAs around the country where we want to focus our branding efforts. And we want to target this audience, try to measure results. And if you come from the TV world, that's actually a really hard thing to do. Most TV that you're buying is bought and sold nationally. You can do kind of local buys, but they're pretty painstaking to do, to aggregate all that. Most of the network buys, the broadcaster buys, are done on a national basis. So if you said, I want to just buy these 10 DMAs, it's a pretty hard thing to pull off. So Mazda took their audience, they took these 10 DMAs, and then they said, well, we're going to bring more of a traditional kind of old school metric. We just want to do reach and frequency for this audience. This is our universal Mazda consumer. This is who we've decided we want to reach. And we want to hit them this many times per week in these DMAs at the top of the funnel with our branding message. And then we want to measure later on, further down the funnel on desktop display, on mobile display, on like lower funnel channels. Let's frequency cap there too. Let's not annoy the consumer. Let's show the right number of ads and get a good idea of what the right total is to show them. And so that's something you'd more traditionally associate with Nielsen-based age and gender, measuring that reach and frequency. But Mazda is applying that to their first-party and third-party audiences. And so they've shifted massive dollars over to do that. Frequency, I think, is a huge issue in connected TV. And the reason is, I suspect if you're like me, you've had the experience where you're watching a full episode player on your Apple TV, watching a TV program, and you see this is going to be ad 1 of 5. And then ads 1, 3, 4, and 5 are the same advertiser. And you're like, and especially if you're in this room and you work in this industry, you're like, oh my God, how are we still doing it this badly? How is it so frustrating for a consumer who's seeing the same ad over and over again with seemingly no control over frequency? And there are reasons behind that. There's competitive separation issues on the sell side. They're trying to live up to commits they've made to advertisers. It's not a super easy problem to solve. But we have to do better for the consumer experience. Otherwise, consumers start to move to non-ad supported channels more and more if the experience is this bad. We're seeing a lot of our clients also tie back to sales results. So kind of the great unanswered question in broadcast and network TV buying is, did my TV advertising work? And if you buy TV, what often happens is you might get a quarterly study or an annual study thrown in for free to measure sales lift. Did sales go up for the product that we were selling on TV? How did we do? And it's something that happens a couple times a year. We're seeing those same studies brought to bear, but on a more real-time, ongoing basis. To say, OK, we ran ads for a car. We branded this automotive brand. Over the course of the next month, how many people went to the dealership? Did they convert? How well is this campaign working? Do we need to change the campaign? Do we need to target new types of users? Or for CPG, where they don't have a great access to the actual purchase data, tying that back to companies like Oracle and Neustar and others who actually measure in the grocery store, did people buy this product? And not measuring that once a year or once every 6 months, but on a real-time basis to inform the campaign. We're also seeing clients who have an e-commerce presence look at, when I did branding on TV, and I tie back to a desktop computer or an app in the same household, did someone watch the ad on TV where they can't really take an action? Did they go take an action on desktop or mobile later on? And so getting a true ROI for how TV is performing. Finally, the last thing we're seeing is more traditional Nielsen GRPs. So we have a lot of clients on our platform who have said, look, we commit to hundreds or thousands of GRPs every year with the major networks. we want to understand on a GRP basis, how are we doing in connected TV? And so we partnered with Nielsen last year to do that. So we'll run campaigns, we'll pass the data to Nielsen, and they'll run it against their panel, and they'll tell us how many incremental GRPs did the connected TV campaign generate versus broadcast TV. And so it gives an apples-to-apples comparison for the marketer to see, well, how does CTV compare to broadcast? What am I getting that's different? And a couple of things that are interesting to call out that we've seen across a bunch of the studies that we've run. The first is on frequency. So what we found with the Nielsen panel was that broadcast was often blowing past the intended frequency that the advertiser had. Let's say the advertiser was trying to do 3 ads per week. What we often found in the broadcast world was when we ran the data, they were actually showing 12, 15, 18 ads per household, a lot more than they intended. And that's because at a national level, it's hard to do frequency capping. If you're serving ads across a major broadcaster network and you're doing that nationally, one household watches 1 TV show, another household watches 10 TV shows. It's actually difficult to control that at a household level. And so you get, on average, a higher overall total. In programmatic, of course, we can control that. So our average is if the client wants to serve 3 ads per week, we're serving 2.9 or 3.01. We're coming in very close to what they want to do. That represents efficiency to the marketer of saying, well, they thought they were getting 3 per week. They're actually getting 15 per week from broadcast. That may be more than they intended. The other thing we saw from Nielsen was that there were a bunch of people that connected TV was reaching that broadcast wasn't. So what would happen was Nielsen would run against their panel, and they come back and tell us, how many net new people did you reach? And it was often the case that we were seeing 30, 40, 50% of the impressions we showed were reaching households that the advertiser hadn't reached at all with their broadcast or cable buy. These are people who had completely moved over to streaming TV, and so that's a massive benefit for the advertiser to reach demographics they weren't reaching before. But this was powerful because GRP is the way TV's been transacted for 50 years. That's not going to go away anytime soon. And so we're trying to measure ourselves with the same metric that everyone else is using. So I want to talk a little bit about what we need to see for connected TV spend and inventory to 10x again in 2018. The first thing is that more inventory is coming over. So there's a skinny bundle boom happening right now where companies like Hulu, Verizon, cable operators are saying, OK, consumers don't want the coaxial cable package that costs $100 a month. Let's give them 20, 30 channels for $20 a month, the skinny bundle. This is just cable, right? This is just the new cable. And so cord cutting kind of becomes irrelevant when you say, well, people are just changing the way they consume the exact same high-quality network content. It's just coming through an Ethernet cable as opposed to coaxial cable. And a lot of these companies are realizing and following the path of Dish Sling and DirecTV Now and saying, let's move a lot of that inventory into programmatic. We recently did some analysis about how much inventory has grown. I mentioned last year went up 10x year over year. We've seen in the first quarter of 2018 alone, 78% growth over all of last year combined. So we're well on pace already to 10x again. If you're on the sell side, if you're at a TV network or a cable operator selling your inventory, there are major benefits to the sellers as well. It's sometimes ironic to think about how programmatic started in display, where there's this huge imbalance between supply and demand. There's so many ads, there's so much display ad inventory that buyers can pick and choose from. In TV, that's more balanced out between supply and demand. There's more scarcity when it comes to connected TV and over the top. So if you're coming from the point of view of a TV network or a seller, the way to look at this is let programmatic compete with your direct sales team. We're seeing a lot of networks do this where they set a price floor of, let's say, $20. That's what their direct team is getting. And if programmatic can bring incremental advertisers or can bring incremental CPMs above that, they're willing to take that on. And because advertisers can bring their data to do that, and they can say, I'm an automaker, here's my first-party audience, I'm willing to pay way above $20 to reach that audience, just like I paid way above that in display when I was doing retargeting. The other solution for networks is that they have an ad diversity problem, which is seeing that same pizza ad 4 times in a row or seeing an insurance company ad 25 times during a college football game. A lot of that is because they don't have a huge amount of demand to bring with a variety of ads. At the Trade Desk, we represent about 30,000 advertisers, largely through agencies and other aggregators. We can bring 38,000 advertisers to bid on that inventory and start to create a better consumer experience for viewers of the network. And this is starting to play out this year. So headlines from the last few days. Nielsen has expanded their tool. So you can now, instead of just transacting on a guaranteed commit for the year on age and gender, they're enabling you to commit on, here are users who are in market for automotive that both buyer and seller can guarantee to each other. Or looking at NBC, where they now have a unified metric to measure in between screens. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. The consumer, whether they're watching on broadcast, cable, or connected TV, as long as the network can measure that and get credit for it towards an upfront commit and bring more data to bear, they should be agnostic to what screen it's running on. The conversation we're having right now with a lot of marketers and a lot of agencies is how the upfront should evolve. Because sometimes in digital you hear this idea of, oh, the upfronts are going to go away, that's a dinosaur kind of thing to do, that's a legacy way of buying. I don't think it is. The upfronts are massively efficient for both buyers and sellers to have a commit that gives both sides certainty of what they're getting for the year. And it's a very simple transaction, but very, very powerful. But what we're seeing now is advertisers saying, let me add a bit more to my commitment. I'm going to say, put the spend down. I'm going to commit $100 million this year, maybe even more than I did last year. But I want to bring more audience data to the table. I want to require that 20% of my spend can be executed through my DSP or through a private marketplace deal. And we're seeing networks willing to do that. We're seeing them willing to transact on guarantees beyond just age and gender and tying to other types of audiences. With advanced buyers, we're actually seeing them negotiate fill rates, saying, send me 100 ads. I'm not going to buy all 100. I'll commit to $1 spend for the year, and I'll commit to buying 25 of the 100 or 50 of the 100. But I need to layer in my audience data, my geographic targeting, all the decisioning I use in every other programmatic channel. And then again, clients using GRPs, still committing with a GRP, but starting to use secondary metrics to look at what audience are they actually buying. Overall, with the explosion of inventory and the tools you can now use to buy programmatically in TV, we think it's going to be another huge year. Thank you guys so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.